She stood in the marble lobby of the company her ex-husband thought she had no power within, one hand resting just lightly on the curve of her pregnant belly, the other holding the final document that would seal his fate. Minutes earlier, he had walked past her without recognition, laughing with executives who now reported directly to her. Only months ago, he had filed for divorce, convinced she was a burden, a quiet woman with nothing to offer. He never knew she owned everything he depended on. Every contract, every project, every brick of the empire he claimed would never accept someone like her. Now, he was about to learn the truth. But before that moment arrived, their story had begun in a very different place, and the mistake that started it all was one neither of them saw coming. Ilara noticed it first in the small things. The way Adrian's footsteps no longer slowed when he reached their front door, the way his key rattled in the lock as if he were bracing himself before entering. Their apartment, once warm with easy laughter, felt colder now, as if someone had cracked a window in the middle of winter. And though she tried to ignore it, there was a sinking heaviness in her chest every time he walked past her without lifting his eyes. Something was slipping, something she couldn't hold on to no matter how quietly she fought for it. She told herself it was temporary. Stress, exhaustion. Titanus Corp had been squeezing him ruthlessly, and he'd always carried ambition like armor, polished, rigid, impenetrable. But now it seemed that armor had turned inward, shutting her out completely. On most nights he came home late with the scent of coffee and fluorescent lights still clinging to his clothes. He dropped his briefcase on the floor, loosened his tie, and exhaled like he was drowning. She would step toward him, hoping to ease him back into the warmth they used to share. "How was work?" she would ask softly. "Fine," he'd reply, already moving past her. One-word answers, clipped and sharp like he didn't have space for anything gentle anymore. Ilara held her secret close, resting a hand against her belly when he wasn't looking. The pregnancy was still new, still fragile, and she wanted the right moment to tell him. Some small pocket of peace where he wasn't weighed down by the world outside. But those pockets never came. The distance grew inch by inch, like a crack spreading silently across glass. At dinner time, he barely touched his food. She watched him push vegetables around his plate, his gaze drifting somewhere far away. When she tried to spark conversation, his jaw tightened. "I need to focus," he murmured once. Not unkind, but not tender either. "There's a promotion on the line. I can't afford distractions." The word stung more than he knew. Distractions. She pressed her fingers into her palm beneath the table so he wouldn't see them shake. She wanted to tell him she understood, that she supported him, that she had always believed in his strength. But something in his tone warned her that even kindness would be unwelcome. He had begun measuring everything, time, effort, relationships, by whether they accelerated or slowed his climb. And somewhere along the way, her presence had slipped into the column of liabilities. A week later, he missed their anniversary. No message, no call. When he finally came through the door past midnight, his eyes were hollow. "I'm sorry," he said, though he didn't sound sorry. "I forgot." She nodded, swallowing the ache. "It's okay." But it wasn't. They both felt the truth settle between them like dust. The next morning, she stood at the kitchen counter brewing coffee when the world shifted again. The mug slipped from her hand, shattering against the tiles, and she pressed a palm to her stomach as a wave of dizziness washed through her. Adrian glanced over but didn't move from where he stood tying his shoes. "You should clean that before it stains," he said. Her breath caught. The coldness wasn't new, but it still startled her every time. She knelt slowly, trying not to cry, gathering the shards one by one. A small cut opened on her finger, bright and sharp. She didn't flinch. That night, as she lay awake beside a man who no longer turned toward her, she realized she was waiting for a version of Adrian who no longer existed. Or perhaps one who had never existed beyond the edges of her hope. Still, she tried. She made his favorite meals. She left encouraging notes on his desk. She asked gentle questions about his day. Each effort landed with a dull thud, unnoticed or brushed aside, and each time she retreated a little more into herself, clinging to the quiet promise growing inside her. Then came the morning when everything broke. Sunlight spilled across the living room floor, soft and golden, but the atmosphere felt heavy. Adrian stood near the window, a stack of papers in his hand. His posture was stiff, deliberate. When Alara stepped into the room, he didn't look up. He simply held the papers out to her. "I think we both know this isn't working," he said. Her heart stopped. "What? What is that?" "Divorce papers." His voice was strangely calm, as if he were reciting a business memo. "I've thought about it for a while. We're not aligned anymore. Our priorities are different. It's better for both of us." The room seemed to tilt. She reached for the back of a chair, steadying herself. "Adrian, can't we talk about this?" "There's nothing to talk about." His eyes were cool, devoid of the warmth she once knew. "We've grown apart. I need to focus on my career. And you." His gaze drifted over her. Soft clothes, tired eyes, quiet presence. "You want different things." He had no idea how true that was. No idea what she carried within her. No idea how close she was to breaking. Her lips parted, ready to tell him. Everything. The baby, her fear, her hope. But the words refused to form. She saw it clearly then. The conversation would change nothing. He wasn't asking for understanding. He was stating a decision he'd already made months ago. "Fine." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "If this is what you want." He didn't notice the tremor in her hand as she took the pen. He didn't notice the way her breath hitched when she signed her name. He didn't notice the quiet way her world collapsed. He folded the papers neatly, almost gratefully, as though a burden had lifted. She turned toward the door because staying another second felt unbearable. Before leaving, she paused. Her eyes lingered on him, searching for any flicker of the man she married. But he simply adjusted his cufflink and thanked her for being civil. She walked out without looking back. On the street below, the wind brushed her face, cool and bracing. She wrapped her arms around herself, not in self-pity, but in protection. Protection for the tiny heartbeat she refused to let him shatter. Tears gathered but didn't fall. She had lost something sacred, but she still had something worth fighting for. In Adrian's mind, the chapter was closed. She would fade from his life, quiet and forgettable. He returned to his office that same afternoon, convinced he had removed a weight from his shoulders. But life has a way of circling back, and the woman he cast aside was about to step into a world far bigger than he ever imagined, a world where she held the power he spent his whole life chasing. He didn't know it yet, but soon her identity would collide with his ambitions in a way he never saw coming. Alara didn't cry the day she left Adrian. She saved her tears for the moment her driver opened the door to the car she hadn't used in years, the one with the tinted windows, the custom interior, the quiet hum of an engine that cost more than the apartment she shared with him. As she slid into the back seat, a soft shiver ran through her, not from sadness but from the eerie familiarity of returning to a life she'd buried. The city blurred past the glass, neon lights smearing into streaks of color, and for the first time since the divorce, she exhaled fully. The mask she wore as a modest wife slipped away, revealing the woman she once was, the woman she would have to become again. The car turned off the main road and climbed a secluded hillside where security gates opened automatically, recognizing the vehicle. Beyond them, her estate waited, sleek lines, quiet fountains, warm light pulsing behind tall windows. It had always looked more like a private museum than a home, yet tonight it felt like a refuge. When she stepped inside, the marble floor cooled her trembling palms, and the scent of jasmine from the garden drifted through the open hall. She rested a hand on her abdomen for grounding. The baby responded with the faintest flutter, a reminder of why she was here. Her chief advisor, Mara, stood waiting near the staircase, tablet in hand. The woman's sharp eyes softened when she saw Ilara. "Welcome back," she said gently. "We've all been worried." Ilara managed a small smile, though the edges wavered. "I needed time." "We know." Mara hesitated, then added, "But things have changed. You'll want to see the reports." Those words tightened something inside Ilara. She followed Mara through a corridor lined with quiet artwork and into a conference room where members of her board rose from their seats in unison. The respect in their posture struck her like a forgotten chord. She had once commanded entire industries. Now, she wasn't sure she had the strength to command a single conversation. Mara dimmed the lights, bringing up financial projections on the screen. "The primary concern is Titanus Corp's Innovation Division, Adrian's division." Ilara froze, fingers curling around the back of a chair. Hearing his name in this room was surreal, like two different worlds had collided without warning. "What happened?" she asked quietly. He pushed through a series of high-risk initiatives without proper approval, overextended budgets, cut corners with vendor contracts, ignored compliance warnings. Mara tapped the screen, highlighting sharp downward trends. "If this continues another quarter, we'll face cascading losses." A slow heat spread through Ilara's chest. Not anger, not yet, but realization. Every reckless decision he'd made under pressure was now threatening the empire she'd sworn to safeguard long before he ever entered her life. She lowered herself into a seat, feeling the weight settle in her shoulders. "He doesn't know," she murmured. "He never knew who he was really working for." Mara's expression was sympathetic. "You stepped away for good reasons, but the company needs you now." Ilara looked around the table. These were people who had trusted her vision for years. They'd followed her through expansions, mergers, global acquisitions, and she had disappeared from them to chase the idea of love, untainted by money, status, or power. She had believed that anonymity would give her a chance at something real, but hiding had cost her more than she expected. A board member cleared his throat. "We didn't want to involve you until necessary, but the situation is deteriorating. We need leadership." Ilara's hand drifted again to her belly. Leadership, legacy, future. The three words connected inside her like pieces of a story she could no longer ignore. She straightened, lifting her chin. "Bring me everything. Internal reports, project outlines, communications. I want to understand every decision made during my absence." "Yes, ma'am," Mara replied, relief flickering across her face. For the next hours, the room filled with the soft click of keys and the rustling of printed pages. Ilara read through each document with a growing sense of clarity. Adrian had been desperate to prove himself, pushing boundaries in an attempt to rise faster. What he didn't understand, what he never understood, was that ambition without strategy was a wildfire. It burned bright, then consumed everything around it. But beneath the frustration, something else bloomed. Resolve. Not revenge, not bitterness, simply the truth that she had duties bigger than heartbreak. When she finally closed the last file, dawn was washing pale light across the room. She rose slowly, stretching stiff muscles. Mara watched her carefully. "You haven't slept." "I will," Ilara said, though she knew she wouldn't. "But first, prepare an announcement for the board. I'm resuming oversight." "Full authority?" Ilara nodded. "Full." Mara exhaled softly. "It's good to have you back." As the board dispersed, Ilara walked onto the balcony that overlooked the estate gardens. The morning breeze was cool, carrying the earthy scent of dew-soaked leaves. She closed her eyes and let the air steady her heartbeat. The sun lifted above the horizon like a quiet promise. She whispered, "I will protect you," her hand resting over her child. "I won't let someone else's mistakes define your future." Somewhere downtown, Adrian was likely waking in his small bachelor apartment, congratulating himself on a fresh start. He probably believed he'd escaped the weight of responsibility, the emotional burden of a marriage he thought held him back. Maybe he even felt lighter. He had no idea that the woman he cast aside was restoring her crown, strand by strand. Later that afternoon, Ilara met privately with the legal counsel overseeing corporate governance. He walked her through the process of reclaiming active control. She listened quietly, absorbing the details with a focus sharper than she'd felt in years. She signed documents that reinstated her decision-making power. She authorized audits. She approved performance reviews that would eventually reach Adrian's desk. Every action was deliberate, measured. She wasn't acting out of spite. She was preparing to secure a future that had already begun to beat beneath her skin. By evening, the estate hummed with activity. Assistants carried binders from room to room. Screens flickered with graphs and schedules. The smell of fresh espresso drifted through the halls. Ilara moved among them like a returning queen, steady, silent, composed. But when she paused at her bedroom window and looked down at the city lights, she felt a strange mix of empowerment and sorrow. She never wanted this war. She never wanted to stand above the man she once loved. She had only wanted to walk beside him. Yet here she was, standing worlds above, because he refused to see her worth when she showed it in simpler form. As she watched the city pulse with life, a small jolt of fear rippled through her. Not fear of the company, or the workload, or the immense responsibility. Fear of what would happen when Adrian inevitably discovered the truth. She imagined the confusion in his eyes, the betrayal he might feel, the regret he would try to hide, and part of her wondered if she was ready for that moment. But she couldn't afford doubt. She turned from the window, whispering to herself, "This is bigger than him." At that same hour, Adrian sat in a crowded bar with co-workers, laughing loudly as if nothing in his life had ever gone wrong. He raised a glass to new beginnings, unaware that the job he depended on was unraveling beneath him. He didn't yet realize that his independence was an illusion, built on foundations he didn't control. Two worlds, moving separately. Two futures, spiraling toward each other. And neither of them knew that the collision had already begun. Their paths would cross again soon, much sooner than either expected, and the first impact would shake the ground beneath both their feet. Adrian heard the news before sunrise, the kind of message that jolts a man out of sleep faster than any alarm. Titanus Corp was initiating a full leadership restructuring. Every division head would be required to present their quarterly strategies directly to the company's true owner. Not the board, not the public shareholders. Someone above them all. Someone unnamed. For a moment, he just sat on the edge of his bed, heart thudding in the dim light, staring at the notification on his phone. A true owner? He had worked here for 7 years and never heard a whisper of such a figure. The company was supposed to be publicly governed, transparent, predictable, democratic in its hierarchy. But this message shattered that illusion. "What does that even mean?" he muttered to himself, running a hand through his hair. "Who the hell owns us?" No answer came, of course. Only the echo of his own uncertainty in the empty apartment. He spent the next 2 days preparing, adjusting slides, rewriting captions, practicing the pacing of his pitch in front of the bathroom mirror. He forced a confident smile, the kind he used during promotions, hoping it would hide the knots forming in his chest. But every time he blinked, he imagined some faceless titan sitting across from him, measuring his worth in silence. Meanwhile, across the city, Ilara stood in a dimly lit observation room lined with a one-way glass wall. It overlooked the presentation hall where each division head would soon enter, one by one. The room around her hummed with low conversation as advisors finalized her briefing notes. She didn't need them. She'd memorized every metric before walking in. Still, her pulse quickened the moment she saw Adrian's name on the schedule. It sat there innocently, printed in a neutral font. No emotion, no history. Just Adrian Hale, Innovation Division. Her stomach tightened. She had known this moment would come eventually. She just hadn't expected it to come so soon, or feel like this. She touched the cool surface of the glass, steadying herself. "I can do this," she whispered. Her breath clouded faintly against the pane, then faded. When Adrian walked into the presentation hall, she felt it before she saw it. A strange pull, low and unsettling, as if a past life had stepped into the room. He carried his briefcase with forced calm, shoulders squared, jaw set. For a heartbeat, she remembered the early days, how that same jaw had softened when he laughed, how those same shoulders had once leaned into her on winter nights. But the man in the room now was not the man she married. He stood before the executives and cleared his throat. "Good morning," he began, voice steady but clipped. "I'll be presenting the strategic direction for the next quarter." Alara watched him through the glass. His pacing was confident, practiced, even impressive at first glance. The slide deck glowed behind him in crisp blues and whites. He used his hands efficiently, his tone rising at the right moments. But something in it felt hollow, like a performance sharpened for applause rather than truth. Her brow furrowed slightly as she listened. The cracks were subtle. Over-promised projections, under-explained risks, assumptions he stated as facts. His department's recent mistakes were hidden beneath layers of charm. The same charm that once made her believe he truly saw her. Now she saw through it as clearly as the light touching the surface of the glass. Mara leaned in. "Should we call him in next?" Alara hesitated. Her heartbeat collided with a deeper instinct, one that pulled her backward and forward at the same time. But she nodded. "Yes, bring him in." Down below, Adrian finished his presentation with a confident, "I'm open to any questions," unaware that the real question stood behind a wall he couldn't see through. The executives thanked him curtly, then directed him to a side door. He walked toward it slowly, smoothing his tie, palms sweating despite the chill in the air. Behind that door, he expected a boardroom, maybe a panel of shareholders. He wasn't prepared for what waited on the other side. When the door clicked open, the first thing he noticed was the silence, thick, controlled. Then he saw her, standing at the head of a long table dressed in charcoal and white, posture poised with a kind of effortless authority that made the room seem smaller around her. He blinked, confused. She didn't look familiar, yet something in the curve of her jaw, the stillness of her eyes, made his breath falter. "Mr. Hale," she said, her voice calm but cool. "Please, have a seat." That voice. It sank into him like a memory he couldn't fully retrieve. "Thank you," he replied, lowering himself into the chair opposite her. His throat felt dry. "I appreciate the opportunity." She studied him for a long moment, expression unreadable. Through the mask of professionalism she fought the tremor in her chest. He sat inches away, close enough that she could see the faint scar near his temple, the one he got fixing a broken shelf in their old living room. Close enough that the faint, familiar scent of his cologne drifted toward her. He had no idea. "Your presentation was polished," she began, folding her hands. "But polishing something doesn't change its substance. Let's discuss that substance." Adrian felt heat rise beneath his collar. "Of course, I'm happy to clarify anything." "Good." Her eyes sharpened. "Start with your projected growth numbers. They're unrealistic based on last quarter's performance. Explain the discrepancy." His stomach dropped. "Well, those projections, they're forward-looking. We're anticipating without evidence," she cut in. "That's not strategy. That's hope." A soft flush climbed his neck. "We're improving efficiency. I believe the division can deliver." "Belief isn't a metric, Mr. Hale. Show me data." Every word was precise, controlled, a blade sharpened on truth. And Adrian felt each cut land because they were fair cuts. Accurate cuts. the kind he wasn't used to receiving from someone he couldn't charm. He swallowed hard. I'll revise the analysis. Provide accurate models. Good. She leaned back, expression still steady. Now, let's talk about risk management. He tried to answer, but her question sliced through every weak point in his logic. Vendor instability, compliance flags, incomplete audit trails. She pushed him into corners he didn't realize he'd backed into, and all the while he kept trying to place her, her tone, her presence, the strange pressure in his chest every time she looked directly at him. Finally, she paused. The air shifted, softer somehow. "Mr. Hale," she said, voice lowering just a fraction. "Why are you in such a hurry?" His breath hitched. He didn't expect that question. I'm working hard to advance, to prove myself." "To whom?" she asked quietly. He frowned. "To the company, to leadership, to whoever makes decisions like this." Her gaze didn't waver. "You can't outrun your own shortcomings by sprinting faster." He stared at her, speechless. The room felt smaller, warmer, almost suffocating. Something inside him stirred, a strange discomfort he couldn't name, as if she'd cracked open a door he'd kept locked for years. Ilara saw the shift in his expression. She felt her own pulse betray her. She needed distance, professionally, emotionally, everything in between. If she stayed another moment, the past might bleed through the armor she'd worked so hard to rebuild. "That will be all for today," she said softly. "You may go." Adrian stood slowly, trying to steady the unease spreading through him. He nodded, though confusion wrinkled the edges of his brow. "Thank you, ma'am." When he left the room, the door clicked shut with a finality that echoed through her. She turned away, exhaling shakily. Her hand drifted to her abdomen again, grounding herself. The baby kicked lightly, as if sensing her turmoil. Mara stepped in quietly. "You handled that well." Ilara didn't answer. She was still staring at the door, replaying the look in Adrian's eyes, not recognition, but something close. A ripple in the walls he'd built around himself, walls she once tried and failed to reach. Meanwhile, down the hall, Adrian walked with a stiffness he didn't understand. Something about that woman. Something in her tone. It rattled him in a way no executive ever had. He loosened his tie, inhaling shakily. Who was she? No one answered him. Yet both of them carried the same lingering tension, a thread pulled taut between them, humming with something unsettling and unfinished. The stage was set, but the truth waiting for them wouldn't reveal itself through power or anger, only through the one emotion neither of them was ready to face. Adrian felt the trouble before anyone said a word, an uneasy silence hanging over the office floor, the kind that made fluorescent lights buzz louder and keyboards fall quiet. Employees whispered in tight circles. Managers walked briskly, eyes darting between screens and emails. And then a message appeared on his phone like a hammer falling from the sky. Urgent. Report to Executive Level 12. Immediate evaluation required. Evaluation. He'd never received one directly from the top. No one had. His pulse kicked hard against his ribs. He didn't know yet that a single error, one overlooked compliance breach within his department, had cost the company millions. He didn't know Ilara had already reviewed every file, every signature, every timestamp, including his. When the elevator doors slid open, a wave of cool, conditioned air swept across him. The hallway was quieter here, polished floors reflecting the soft glow of recessed lighting. He wiped his palms against his trousers, telling himself to stay calm. Fix it. Just fix it. But the moment he stepped into the conference suite, he froze. She was there. Ilara stood at the far end of the room, overlooking a floor-to-ceiling window as though gathering her thoughts from the city below. Her posture was tense but graceful, a profile he recognized without understanding why. He had seen that silhouette 1,000 times, leaning over a kitchen counter, folding laundry, brushing her hair. Something inside him twisted, sharp and unnerving. She turned slowly at the sound of the door, and the expression she wore was unlike anything he'd ever seen on her before. Composed, controlled, powerful. And yet, beneath the surface, something fragile flickered in her eyes. "Mr. Hale," she said softly. "Sit down." The air thinned. He obeyed without thinking, lowering himself into the chair opposite her. His throat tightened. "Is this about the quarterly review?" "No," she replied, setting a folder on the table. "It's about the error your team approved last month." He felt heat rush to his face. There must be a misunderstanding. I didn't." "You signed the clearance." She slid the document toward him. "Your initials are here." His breath caught. There they were, clear as day, his own carelessness printed in black ink. Inside, shame stirred like a storm. "I can explain," he began, voice cracking. "It was chaotic that week. We were understaffed. Alara held up a hand, and the room fell silent again. "Excuses won't fix the damage, Mr. Hale." Her voice trembled ever so slightly. Only someone who once loved her would hear it. Adrian felt something shift in his chest, a faint click of recognition he couldn't place. Her tone, her cadence, her eyes glistening at the edges when she contained too much feeling. He leaned forward, studying her more carefully. "Do I know you?" he asked quietly. Her breath hitched, just enough for him to notice. "No," she replied, too quickly. "This isn't personal." But it was. Every second of this moment was pulsing with unspoken history. She moved around the table, gathering additional documents, but her fingers trembled. Not visibly to most, only to someone who once watched her hands trace the rim of a mug during long conversations. Adrian's heartbeat stumbled. The trembling, the broken inhale, the quiet strength trying desperately not to crack. "Alara," he whispered, and the name left him before he could stop it. She went completely still. The silence that followed was not cold or sharp. It was fragile, trembling with revelation. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to meet his, and in that instant, everything collided. Two worlds, two identities, two versions of a woman he never truly saw. Recognition detonated behind his ribs. His ex-wife, the woman he dismissed as ordinary, the woman he left behind without hesitation. She was the owner, the real power behind Titanus Corp., the person he had been trying to impress for weeks. He felt the blood drain from his face. "Alara," he breathed again, his voice cracking. "It's you." Her eyes glistened, but her expression stayed painfully composed. "Yes, it's me." He pressed a shaking hand against his forehead, humiliation washing through him like a tidal wave. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't." "That much was obvious," she said softly. The softness hurt more than anger ever could. He stared at her, remembering every moment he overlooked her dreams, every time he dismissed her quiet presence, every conversation he abandoned halfway. She had been carrying whole empires while he complained about long work days. She had loved him enough to hide her wealth so he could love her without feeling small, and he proved he didn't know how to love her either way. "I was blind," he whispered. "Alara, I treated you like someone who wasn't worth keeping," she finished, her voice barely above a breath. He flinched. Her gaze lowered, and for a brief moment the pain she'd held back spilled through. "I lived modestly because I wanted something real with you. I wanted a life that didn't revolve around money or power. I wanted a partner who cared about me, not what I owned." Her voice shook. She steadied it. "But you valued ambition more than us. Every time I reached for you, you reached past me." He opened his mouth, but the words collapsed in his throat. Nothing he could say would erase what he did. the truth wrapped around him like chains. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry." Alara didn't step back, yet she didn't step forward either. She simply looked at him, truly looked, her expression filled with disappointment so deep it hollowed him out. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she whispered. "Not through failure, not through shame." His vision blurred at the edges. He blinked rapidly, but the sting remained. "I never knew. I didn't see you. I didn't understand what I had." Her voice softened, but the softness cut sharper than steel. "You didn't try." A tremor of breath escaped him. She gathered the documents with trembling fingers, and he saw her other hand drift toward her abdomen in an instinctive, protective gesture. He noticed it, and, for the first time, a sliver of fear, true, raw fear, entered his chest without explanation. "Alara," he said again, this time gentler, "is something wrong?" She stiffened, too quickly, too subtly. She tried to mask it by turning away, but he felt the shift in the air. Her lips parted, as if she might say something, but she swallowed it. "This meeting is over." "Wait, please." His voice cracked open. "Talk to me." She didn't, couldn't, not now. She walked to the door with steady steps that shook only at the edges, and Adrian watched her go with his heart lodged painfully in his throat. He had destroyed the one relationship that ever mattered. He had walked away from the woman he should have fought for. And now, faced with her truth, he felt the ground tilt beneath him. But the final blow wouldn't come from the past. It would come from a crisis neither of them saw approaching, one that would force every buried emotion to the surface and test them in ways power never could. Alara didn't hear the warning her body tried to give her. She'd grown numb to exhaustion, to long nights under cold office lights, to the pressure of holding an empire steady while her own heart wobbled on unsteady ground. But on this night, long after the building had emptied and the city outside slipped into a darker hush, her vision blurred without reason. Lines on the report in front of her doubled, then swayed. She blinked hard, but the words refused to steady. A slow rush of dizziness crawled up her spine. She reached for the table, fingers scraping against its edge. "Not now," she whispered to herself, but her breath fractured. A cramp, sharp, sudden, deep, folded her forward. The room tilted sideways, lights dimming into a tunnel. She tried to call out, but no sound left her mouth. And then she collapsed. At the far end of the hall, Adrian had been pacing, trying to gather the courage to speak with her again, not as an employee, not as a man seeking forgiveness, but as someone who finally understood the weight of what he'd lost. He was rehearsing a single sentence when a soft thud echoed from her open office door. He froze. "Alara." No answer. He ran. The sight of her on the floor ripped the breath from his lungs. Papers were scattered like fallen feathers around her. Her face was pale, lips trembling. One hand curled instinctively over her abdomen. "Alara!" His voice broke as he dropped to his knees beside her. "Alara, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered weakly, barely lifting. "The baby," she gasped. Fear hit him with such force it left him shaking. "I'm here. I've got you. Stay with me, please." He scooped her into his arms, startling himself with how easily instinct overtook panic. She felt too light, too fragile. He ran through the hallway, his heartbeat thundering in his ears, shouting for help until 2 security guards rushed in. "She needs a hospital now," he commanded, the authority in his voice coming not from rank but from pure desperation. "Call ahead. Tell them we're coming." The guards didn't question him. They moved fast. Within minutes, Adrian was in the back of the company car with her, holding her upright as she struggled to stay conscious. Streetlights flashed across her face. Yellow, then dark, then yellow again, revealing every flicker of pain. "Adrian!" Her voice was faint, almost lost in the hum of the engine. "Yes, I'm here," he said quickly, gripping her hand. "I won't leave." "You shouldn't be here." "I should have been here years ago," he whispered, throat burning. "Don't speak. Just breathe." Her head rested against his shoulder, and for the first time since their divorce, he felt the weight of her trust. Worn, fragile, but still there in some quiet, stubborn way. When they reached the emergency entrance, nurses rushed her inside. Adrian tried to follow, but a hand pressed to his chest. "Sir, only authorized family or next of kin," one of them said firmly. "I am—" The words stopped on his tongue. He wasn't her husband anymore. He had forfeited that right, but he couldn't walk away. "I'm not leaving," he said, voice low, shaking. "I'm staying right here." For the next hour, he sat in the waiting room with elbows on his knees, fingers laced together so tightly his knuckles turned white. Every once in a while, he pressed his palms to his face, trying to control the shaking. Her blood on his shirt sleeve dried in thin streaks, a painful reminder of how close he came to losing the only person who had ever truly seen him. When the doctor finally stepped out, Adrian jumped to his feet so fast the chair behind him slid backward. "Is she—" His voice cracked. "She's stable," the doctor said. "Both she and the baby. Stress-induced complications. She needs rest and monitoring." Adrian's knees nearly buckled. "Can I see her?" he asked, barely above a whisper. The doctor studied him for a long moment before nodding. "She asked for you." That simple sentence cut him open. He followed the doctor down a quiet hallway, each step heavy with fear, regret, and something else, something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. When he entered her room, the lights were dimmed, casting everything in soft shadows. Machines beeped steadily beside her, gentle reminders that she was still here, still fighting. She lay propped against pillows, her breathing slow but calm now. Her hair fanned across the sheets, and her hands rested lightly over her stomach. She opened her eyes. For the first time since their marriage ended, Alara looked at him without armor. "You stayed," she murmured. He swallowed hard and lowered himself into the chair beside her. "You scared me," he said, voice rough, "more than anything ever has." Silence settled around them, soft and fragile. "I didn't want you to see me like that," she whispered. He shook his head. "I should have seen you long before tonight." Her gaze drifted to his shirt, noticing the dried streaks of her blood. A faint tremor passed through her. "You didn't have to come," she said. "Yes," he replied softly. "I did, and I'm not leaving now." She studied him carefully, as if trying to determine whether the man sitting beside her was the same one who once walked away so easily. There was no arrogance in him now, no walls, only raw honesty and something that looked a lot like remorse. "Adrian," she said quietly, "you hurt me." He nodded, eyes shining. I know I did." "I loved you," she added, voice shaking. "I gave up everything just to build something real with you." He stared at his hands, ashamed to meet her eyes. "I was selfish, blinded by my own goals. I didn't see you, and I can't take that back." He looked up then, and the pain in his expression was unfiltered. "I'm not asking for another chance. You owe me nothing, but I needed to tell you the truth. I'm sorry for who I was, and I'm sorry for what it cost us." Her chest rose with a trembling breath. She hadn't expected this. Not humility, not accountability, not the quiet sincerity threading his every word. "People don't change overnight," she whispered. "No," he agreed, "but I'm trying. Not for you, not for us, for the man I should have been." A long moment passed. Then she shifted her hand slowly closer to his on the bed. Not touching, just close enough that warmth brushed warmth. "I don't know what the future looks like," she said softly, "but you can stay involved if you want to." He inhaled sharply. "I want to. more than anything. Her eyelids grew heavy, exhaustion pulling at her. Adrian leaned back but didn't leave his chair. He watched her breathing slow, watched the tension melt from her brow, watched her drift into a safer, calmer sleep. Every rise and fall of her chest felt like a second chance he never expected to receive. And, as he sat there, listening to the quiet symphony of machines, feeling the steady hum of hope wrap itself around the room, he understood something with painful clarity. This wasn't redemption yet. It was simply the beginning of a reckoning he would face step by step, day by day. Outside, dawn crept toward the horizon, painting the sky with pale light. A new day waited for them both, uncertain, fragile but shared in a way neither could deny. And somewhere ahead, their fractured bond would face one final test before it had any hope of becoming whole again. The moment the first cry broke through the hospital room, Adrian felt something inside him unravel. Not painfully, but gently, like a knot loosening after years of tension. He didn't expect to react that way. He didn't expect his breath to catch, or his vision to blur, or his hands to start trembling before he even touched her. But the sound of that tiny voice pierced straight through every layer of pride he had ever built. A nurse placed the baby in Ilara's arms first. She looked down at her daughter, eyes shining with a mixture of awe and exhaustion, her hair damp against her temples. For a moment, the world around her softened into a warm blur. Monitors blinking quietly, soft light spilling across white sheets, a hush in the air that held the weight of something sacred. Adrian stood nearby, unmoving, as if afraid to break the spell. His heart pounded in a rhythm that didn't feel like fear anymore. It felt like awe, pure, unfiltered awe. Ilara glanced up at him. Her voice was barely audible. "Do you want to hold her?" He swallowed hard, nodding once. "If you're sure." She shifted carefully, guiding the tiny bundle into his arms. And when the weight of his daughter settled against his chest, small, warm, impossibly fragile, his knees nearly buckled. He held her like she was made of light and glass, terrified of even breathing too deeply. "She's perfect," he whispered. His voice cracked on the last word. Ilara watched him, her expression softening in ways she didn't expect. The man holding their child was not the one who once walked past her without seeing her. He wasn't the man who chased promotions instead of conversations, who measured worth by titles and opportunities. That man had broken her heart. The one in front of her now was someone quieter, someone humbler, someone learning. The baby yawned, her tiny mouth forming a perfect circle. Adrian let out a shaky laugh, one hand cupping her head with the gentlest touch she had ever received from him. And Ilara, for the first time in months, felt something inside her loosen too. She said softly, "Her name is Aria." He looked up, eyes damp. "Aria," he repeated. "That's beautiful." "She deserves something beautiful," Ilara murmured. He nodded, eyes returning to the little girl. "She does." For a long while, none of them spoke. The room was filled with simple sounds. The baby's sleepy breaths, the faint hum of machines, the distant murmurs of nurses in the hallway. It was peaceful in a way neither of them had felt for years. Eventually, Adrian sat in the chair beside the bed, still holding Aria, still trembling slightly. "Ilara." "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For letting me be here. For trusting me enough to hold her." He paused. "I know I don't deserve that trust yet." She studied his face. There was no arrogance now, no expectation, just truth. "You're her father," she said. "That's something trust grows from, not something it requires up front." His eyes glistened. "I'll earn it. I promise." She didn't answer immediately. She just watched him, the way he held Aria close, the way he whispered meaningless syllables just to keep her calm, the way his whole posture shifted into something protective and deliberate. "You're different," she finally said. He exhaled. I'm trying to be. For her. And for whatever you'll allow. The honesty in his voice pressed gently against the walls she'd built. Walls carved from pain, disappointment, and months of clinging to strength she never asked for. But watching him now, she realized those walls no longer needed to keep him out. They were meant to protect something more fragile than pride. I'm not ready to talk about us, she said carefully. Not yet. He nodded, accepting the boundary with quiet respect. I understand. But I want Arya to have both of her parents, she continued. I want her to grow up knowing love, not tension, stability, kindness. You have my word, he replied, voice firm and sincere. I'll be here, in whatever way you need. Another silence fell between them, this one lighter, less rigid, as if space itself had softened. A nurse returned to check vitals, adjusting monitors and offering Alara a reassuring smile. When she left, Adrian carefully placed Arya back in her bassinet. He lingered over her, brushing a thumb across her tiny knuckles, committing every detail to memory. She has your smile, he murmured. Alara gave a tired laugh. She doesn't even know how to smile yet. She will, he said, and when she does, it'll look like yours. Her cheeks warmed, not with romance but with the gentle weight of being seen again after so long. When visiting hours ended, Adrian stepped back, not leaving but giving her room to rest. I'll stay in the family lounge, he said. If you need anything at all, I'll be there. Thank you, she whispered, meaning it more than he knew. The next morning, when Ilar was cleared for discharge, the early sunlight filled the hallway with soft gold. Nurses congratulated her, offering warm smiles as she held Arya close. Adrian walked beside her, not touching, not guiding, simply matching her pace, step for step. The elevator ride down was quiet, comfortably quiet. Outside, the air was crisp, carrying the scent of morning rain. The car was parked at the curb, waiting. Adrian moved ahead to open the door for her, then paused, unsure if the gesture was welcome. Alara met his hesitation with a small nod. He exhaled, relieved, and held the door as she settled inside with their daughter. Before he could walk around to the other side, she spoke through the open door. Adrian, she said softly. He leaned slightly toward her. Yes? Her eyes held something gentle, something cautious, something beginning. Thank you for walking with me. His breath shook. Always. As he rounded the car, she looked down at Arya sleeping peacefully in her arms. A fragile thread of hope wound itself quietly around her heart. Not a promise, not yet, but a possibility. A new beginning didn't need guarantees. It only needed honesty, time, and two people willing to step forward without pride weighing them down. And for the first time in a long time, Alara felt that the path ahead, whatever shape it took, didn't have to be walked alone.